Number 5, Billows Pillow says, how can I reconcile 1 Corinthians 10:13 after decades of struggle with sloth, bad work ethic, sin at work, praying for forgiveness, but was recently diagnosed ADHD. I now see I can't help it without meds. Well, let me give you my answer on this. 1 Corinthians 10:13. And my answer is primarily a theological answer, not a medical answer. So if you're looking for medical expertise on ADHD, I don't have it. I'm not going to try to pretend I do. But I do trust the scripture on this topic of temptation. And I do think that there is a cliff that some have walked off when it comes to ADHD and these other issues. I also want to say what I'm about to tell you is not meant to minimize those things. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was a kid. I don't know if it wasn't a very good diagnosis. The doctor asked me like 3 questions. Are you bored in school? Yeah. Do you find the work challenging? No. Do you find that you frequently get distracted and you have a hard time staying focused? Yeah, which is true still today, by the way. And then she goes, and this was when Ritalin just came out, and she's like, at least I think it just came out. And she's like, I'd like to give you a prescription for Ritalin. I think you have ADHD. And I remember my mom looking at me going, what do you think? And I was like in elementary school, and I was smart enough to go, in my head, I thought, I don't think that sounded like a very good diagnosis. She didn't take any tests. There was literally no tests. She just asked me questions. Like, I just find it very difficult. So, now we get drop frames. Man, it's a sketchy day for streaming. So the statements I'll now make about these things. 1 Corinthians 10:13 does give us a rule that I think applies to you, even if you have ADHD, even if you legitimately have it, even though I didn't exactly get a real diagnosis. Hold on just a second, guys. We live stream, and so I have to check these issues. Crackle's back. I don't know if anything I did that might have made that different. Okay, the verse says, no temptation's overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. Do you believe that God is faithful? I do. He will not let you, this is based on God's faithfulness. He's not going to allow something. What's he not going to allow? He's not going to let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Now, some think the escape is I'm escaping the temptation, but he means escaping the sin. So I'm going to be tempted. You will be tempted, but God is holding back temptation so that you do have a choice. So when it comes to ADHD or, and you mentioned specific issues, let's read them again. Sloth, bad work ethic, sin at work, praying for forgiveness. Okay, that's just something you were doing, but you were diagnosed with ADHD. You now see that you can't help it without meds. Now, it's possible that meds help you and that things get easier with meds. But I'm going to tell you that this is, I think, the biblical truth. And this is the truth I tell myself too. It's hard, but I believe it's entirely true. Every time you were slothful at work, that you had bad work ethic, or that you sinned at work, that was a sin you didn't have to do. And that's based on God's faithfulness. 1 Corinthians 10:13. You didn't have to do it. Now, it might be true, and please hear me out. It might be true that with ADHD or whatever is going on with you, that you have increased temptations and you have increased difficulty handling the issues that are going on. But that fundamentally, the temptation is the same thing other people get tempted with. And there's countless people around the world that are tempted to be lazy, that are tempted to be distracted and stuff like that. I used to have a guitar student who, he had ADHD. And at one point I was, we're sitting there doing guitar lessons. He was losing interest in it, right? Which happens commonly with kids. You got like a teenager, he's like 14 or 15 or something. And I'm teaching him to play guitar and he's not really focusing. And so I stopped and I asked him, did you hear what I just asked you to do? And he's like, no, sorry, Mike. I said, no, I need you to focus. I need you to pay attention, that this is important, So do this behavior. And then he turned to me and he says, well, I can't help it. I have ADHD. This is my terror with ADHD diagnoses. I can't help it. I have ADHD. I can now feel comfortable with my sin. I can now feel comfortable with my bad behaviors because I'm a special case. I have an excuse. I've got the get out of sin free card, get out of guilt free card. And I could throw it out there. I have ADHD. It's not my fault. So I told him, I said, I have a hard time paying attention to things too. But do you know what that means if you have ADHD? And he goes, what? I said, it means you have to work harder. Well, the coolest thing was like a week later, we had a similar situation where he stopped paying attention for a moment. I said something, and he was just like staring at the wall. And then, which is, I understand. Okay, I'm not calling that sin. I'm just using that as an example of how this diagnosis can cause you to just give up even trying to be godly. And he turned to me and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. I know I really have to work harder. I got to try harder to pay attention. That's the takeaway, right? If you're blind, you have to try harder to not run into things when you're walking. You can't just swing your stick around and run down the street and then tell people, sorry, I'm blind. You have to also work. Everybody understands you're blind, but you have to work harder to make sure that you don't run into things. This is the nature of being blind. When you're deaf, you have to work hard to read lips. You have to work hard to pay attention to what's going on around you. You can't just ignore the world and say, well, I'm deaf. It's no big deal. There's extra effort that needs to be put into it. I think that's the truth. Now, maybe your medication helps you. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm just saying, don't go there. I can't help it. All the sin I've done for all these years at work, where I was getting paid to do things I didn't do, where I was going behind my employer's back by misusing my time and basically stealing from them, that was totally not my fault. Don't go there. As a Christian, you need the grace of the cross. You don't need the excuses that tell you that you don't even need grace. You do need grace. You need God's forgiveness, but you do not need excuses that tell you that your sin was never really sin. That's a very dangerous thing for believers.